Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a video update for this 1/6 scale Dragon Panzer II Ausf kit. Since the last video, the last of the model's details have been added, and the model in this condition now is ready to be painted. Since the new fasteners came in, I was now able to start working on the tank's sprocket modifications. The tank sprockets are the right size and have some decent detailing in them, especially most notably on the hub, how we have the castle nuts mounted along the circumference. However, the sprockets themselves on the fasteners that would hold the teeth ring on, or the tooth ring, which would be this piece over here, we noticed they are small, little rounded rivet type, round head rivet type fasteners. On the real Panzer II, these would be hex bolts. Also on the real Panzer II, in the areas in between the two bolts would be two more holes that the ring would be able to lock onto. The ring itself was perforated in several locations, which made mounting and removing the sprocket a little bit easier. To mount on the replacement screws, I have to first drill out the current screws that are on here. The sprocket does have the correct number of fasteners, so it was just a simple bait and switch, really. I use a 3/32 scale drill bit on a drill press to just drill right through the plastic round dome rivet. The little splooge that's left on the sides will be removed with X-Acto or with some sandpaper. And then once that is removed, I will then be able to draw with a pencil the two missing holes that would have been in between these two fasteners here. Once the two holes are drawn with a pencil, I will then go ahead and with a drill bit, again on the press, I will then make the indentations of where the other two holes would have been. After the replacement fasteners are added, I will then drill out the castle nuts and add the lock retaining pin, which would keep the nuts from unscrewing when the vehicle would be in motion. Once that is complete, the sprocket transformation is completed and will then have the interior will be painted with its base coat and then will be mounted to the tank's final drives. In the previous scene, I made a small little error. I said that there's two divots in between the two fasteners. In actuality, there's three. If we notice here, I have marked everything with a pencil, and there are now three small divots, or will be three small divots in between each of the screws. For the drill bit that I will be using to make these holes, I will be using a 3/32 drill bit mounted in a drill press that is set to only go to a certain depth. I did this because you don't want to drill all the way through the sprocket, only want to put a small little indentation on the surface. Side of the sprocket, it's actually a hollow casting just like the swing arms were that I showed in an earlier video. To fill in the teeth ring, I use my standard casting resin, however epoxy can also be used. The resin is then sanded smooth. I put the sprocket on my lathe, and when it spins I just touch some sandpaper on it just to even out the resin as well as the teeth. Once it is all sanded smooth, I will then, as you notice, I've drilled in the holes for where the fasteners will go, and the fasteners will be mounted with their nuts. Fasteners are going to be the same ones that I use for the front fender supports, only the nuts are going to be in scale with the fasteners, and the nuts are going to be right over here. Here goes the number again for the item number in case you want to purchase them from microfasteners.com. Before you can start inserting the cotter pins into the castle nut, you need to first Dremel out a small hole to fit the wire through. For best results, I used the 1/32 bit from this little Dremel micro bit pack, which can be found in any hardware store or in a big box store like a Walmart. And as for drilling out the things themselves, I use the actual Black & Decker flex shaft here that's mounted onto an RTX. I recommend doing this with a flex shaft because using a standard rotary tool like a Dremel or an RTX, the actual chuck is fairly big, and will have really trouble getting into this really tight space here that you need to drill out these small little holes. Once the holes are all drilled out, you can then start adding in the cotter pins once they're made. Now, to fabricate the cotter pin, I'm going to be using a small, very thin piece of floor wire, and to actually form the cotter pin, I'm going to be using a thicker piece of floor wire. This floor wire here is about 1/16 of an inch thick, and it's been placed in my vise. To create the cotter pin itself, there's really no special tools required, just using your bare hands. What you're going to do is just going to take a little piece of wire, bend that around the wire in the vise, and then with your thumb and your index finger, you're just going to pinch the neck of the area around the wire, thus forming the cotter pin. After you pull it off of the form, there's your pin. Then with a simple snip, leave about, give yourself a little bit of margin, snip it, snip a little bit off of the one so you have one shorter leg. Making the pin with the one shorter leg will make it easier to slip inside the hole once it's ready for installation. And there's your cotter pin. To actually install the cotter pin, you take the miniature pin and you put it in a needle nose plier. You then find the nut that you need to put it in, which will be right here. You find the hole that you drilled, then you carefully insert it in. Once the pin is inserted into the castle nut, you then bend the extra length of pin around the nut itself, so you get that type of a shape over there. If the rods are a little too long, you want to snip them. Easily done with your wire snip. Just go and shorten them about half to any length you deem would be appropriate. And there we have it. And here goes the completed sprocket with all the complete mods done to it. The sprocket itself is now nicely detailed, and from this point here, the back portion will be primed, as well as the front portion will be primed, and the back portion here will get its base coat of German Panzer Gray. Once it has its base coat, it will get some airbrush weathering, and then upon which it will then be permanently mounted to the tank's final drive. For the model Siren, the kit gives you a back pan as well as a detail faceplate. The kit supply detail faceplate isn't too bad and is actually somewhat passable. However, instead of using the faceplate, I went ahead and took the rear pan and mounted a spare Panzerwerk German Siren pan to the front of it. The Panzerwerk version, the reason why I went with the Panzerwerk version over the kit one is because unlike the kit one, where as you could see it's solid cast or solid molded plastic material, the Panzerwerk version is actually hollow and the slits are actually molded open. So it gives you a little bit more of a realistic look to it. Also, if you notice that the Panzerwerk version does have the smaller in-scale fasteners that would mount the faceplate to the rear pan. The kit did have originally some nubs molded in, however, to mount on the Panzerwerk's Siren face, I had to delete them. The Siren itself is actually spare from a older project that I did several years ago. When you purchase the Panzerwerk Sirens, they come in a set, and the set supplies you with one back plate and an option for different type of faceplates. You have this version here, which is more conical, and then you have the pressed version like over here. Since I had an extra one floating around, I went ahead and just used it off on this project. Also, as of note, you can see that the resin is a white colored, creamy type material. So is this one here. The reason why these are this color is that these are very old, and I've had these for several years now. nowadays when you purchase parts from panzerwerk.com, they come in a blackish gray tinted resin, and these are a newer production. I still have some of the old ones on hand, so you get to compare the material. The mold, they're casted in the same molds, and both pieces are just as good. For the tank's headlights, the kit supplies you with 2 hollow headlights and 2 closed-off headlight caps. The way the kit is designed is that you're supposed to take this cap and glue it directly to the headlight, and then mount the whole headlight assembly to the vehicle. However, I wanted to do something with the headlight. Since the headlight bell itself is hollow, I decided to actually put a lens in it. First, I had to widen out the bell for use with a resin headlight insert that I have here. Now, as of note, these 2 headlights, these 2 lenses here are off-cast and are totally useless for pretty much every one of my builds, as well as for use in part sets. If you notice, there's several voids and air bubbles in them, and on a clear resin piece, that is just unacceptable. However, for this application, they're going to be used. Thing is that since these headlights are going to be capped off and closed off with the blackout lens, you're only going to see a small little sliver. And that small little sliver will be the part of the lens that is ironically not touched. So for this application, they're going to be used, rather than having them waste away in my refuse bin. To mount the headlights into the bell, I first had to thin out the walls of the bell and remove the tangs for which you would mount the blackout lens to. I put the bell in the lathe, and I went ahead and just turned it down very carefully so that I had enough room to actually fit in the lens, which will drop in as such. A similar feature had to have been done to the blackout lens itself. Keep in mind, the blackout lens itself was plugged and was not see-through. You're actually supposed to go in there with a silver paintbrush and just paint that. To hollow it out, I put it again on the lathe, and this round area here is where it actually stuck out to plug into the bell housing. I turned it on the lathe till finally got thin enough for the molded in section to just pop right out. Now, the way it's going to be installed is I'm going to super glue the lens into the bell housing as such, and then the blackout will then go right over it. If you look, you will see some detail, which will add to the realism of the build. Also, as of note, if we notice that the inside is painted silver. The reason why it's painted silver is so that when you mount the lens in, you have the silver showing through the clear resin, which gives it a nice little silver haze, which is just like that of a real headlight lens. Here goes the rear portion here of all of the lights and siren assembly. As you can see, there's an electrical conduit that comes out of the headlight and also connects to the no-tech light, which then runs into the vehicle. The same detail was also added to the siren here. There's a small little clamp that is bolted to the tank's fender that keeps the wire, or in this case the conduit, from flopping around. The conduit itself is just made from a piece of electrical wire, and the same detail was also added to both sides of the headlights. Another thing as of note is the wire itself, the conduit, has to go through the support brace into the lower portion here of the model's headlight. For the model's track, I use the track that the kit gives you. The track itself is individual track links, however, unlike some 1/35 scale tanks, on this one here, they're actually workable. And they articulate via a small pin. The pins and the links are supplied with the kit, and the tracks themselves are actually nicely done. They're one of my most favorite parts on the whole vehicle. The tracks articulate very well. They flex and they mate with the suspension and lock on with the timing on the sprocket practically perfect. As for the number of tracks itself, the kit gives you plenty of tracks to get the job done. After assembling both the left and right hand side track, I still had about a full runner and a half of spare links to go. These spare links are perfect in case you accidentally break a track, or if you want to add some spare track to the vehicle itself for detail or for uses like a napclid armor. Now, the kit does give you slightly less amount of pins. They do supply you with enough pins to get the job done. However, if you need to assemble spare track, you're not going to have enough pins for that. Luckily, the track itself, the hole, is about 7/64 in diameter. And you could use a small nail like this found at any hardware store that will fit the track link perfectly and can be used to assemble some spare sets. As for how the track suspension fits with the track, I went ahead and assembled and temporarily installed the track on either side of the tank's hull. Just to show how well the tank rolls. The model pushes very well, which is easy to see why there's so many people who want to RC convert these models. The models roll with the slightest of ease. And this is also particularly as of note because of the tank's wheel retention system. You'll never have to worry about the wheels falling off or popping off on you as you would with the pre-built version of the model that only have the wheels press fit on. Also, as of note, if I move the idler to a different notch and add 1 or 2 more links to the track, you can get some sag going on your model, which, depending on your taste, would help it in the way it looks.